In early 2026, the new clinical nutrition guidelines quietly doubled the recommended protein intake. The old number was 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, and the new number is 1.6. That is not a small tweak. That is a full reversal of what dietitians were saying for 30 years.
And now every shelf in every supermarket is screaming the same word at you. High-protein bread, high-protein cookies, high-protein ice cream, high-protein pasta. Even the chocolate bars are joining in.
So the honest question is this. Did the science actually shift under our feet, or did the marketing department just find a new hype train to ride after the collagen wave died out? I spent about 3 weeks reading the papers and running the numbers on my own plate, and the answer surprised me in both directions.
I'm not a doctor. I'm the guy who reads the studies and tests them on himself and then tells you what the researchers I actually trust are saying about it. Today we're doing protein, the whole thing, no fluff.
Before we argue about the number, let's do the 60-second version of why protein is even on the table. Because most people think protein equals muscle, and that's maybe a third of the story.
Yes, your muscles are built from protein, and if you strip protein out of your diet, your muscles literally shrink to feed the rest of the body. But your immune system is also protein. Every antibody your body makes to fight a virus is a folded chain of amino acids. Run low on protein for long enough, and your immune response gets sloppy. Then there's transport. The hemoglobin that carries oxygen through your blood is a protein. The carriers that shuttle fats and vitamins around your body are proteins. Your hormones, insulin, growth hormone, glucagon, a lot of them are peptides, which is just a fancy word for short proteins. And then enzymes, which is the one people forget. Enzymes are what let your liver detox, what let your brain fire signals, what let your metabolism actually run. All of them are proteins. So when I say protein, I don't just mean biceps. I mean the raw material your body uses to keep the lights on.
That's the setup. Now let's talk about why the number just doubled.
Modern medicine gave us a strange gift. We're living way longer than our grandparents did, but we're also living long enough to hit two problems the human body was never really designed to face at scale. One is dementia, and that's a different video. The other one is muscle loss, and the technical name for it is sarcopenia. After roughly age 65, if you're not actively fighting for your muscle, you lose it fast. And losing muscle is not just an aesthetic thing where your arms look thinner in photos. Muscle is the biggest metabolic organ you have. So when it shrinks, your metabolism slows down with it. Less muscle also means worse balance, and worse balance means falls. A single bad fall at 75 is often the event that ends someone's independence, because a broken hip at that age has a mortality rate people don't want to talk about at dinner. So this whole conversation is not really about looking shredded on a beach in July. It's about being 78 and still carrying your own groceries up the stairs. That's the actual stake, and once you frame it that way, the new protein number stops sounding like gym bro nonsense and starts sounding like a public health correction that's about 30 years late.
Okay, the number. The old guideline was 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, and that number came from studies designed to prevent deficiency, not to promote thriving. It was basically the "you won't get sick" floor, and somewhere along the way, it got treated as the ceiling.
The new working number that shows up in the 2026 guidelines and in the papers researchers like Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman have been quoting for years is roughly double that. We're looking at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight for most adults who want to protect their muscle and their metabolism over the long haul. Now here's the part almost nobody explains correctly, and this is where people either freak out or give up. You do not multiply by your current body weight if your current body weight is not where it should be. You multiply by your ideal body weight, which you can estimate from a normal BMI range for your height. If you're carrying an extra 50 pounds of body fat, that extra 50 pounds does not need its own protein allowance. Fat tissue doesn't ask for amino acids the way muscle does. So for a rough example, a person whose healthy weight would sit around 70 kilograms lands on roughly 110 to 115 grams of protein per day. For me personally, at my ideal weight, I land around 120 grams a day, and I'll show you what that actually looks like on a plate later in the video. And this is exactly the range Attia has been pushing on his podcast for years, and Huberman has echoed it repeatedly. The official guidelines finally caught up to what the longevity crowd has been saying since roughly 2019.
So the fair question is, why did the number sit at 0.8 for so long if the higher number is actually better? Two reasons. and both of them are more human than scientific.
The first reason is cost. Public health guidelines are written for entire populations, and protein has historically been the most expensive macronutrient on the plate. If you tell an entire country to double their protein intake, and half the country can't afford it, you've just written a guideline that fails on day one. So the numbers stayed conservative for a long time simply because feeding a nation is a budget problem, not just a biology problem. The second reason is the kidney myth, and this one deserves its own moment because it scared a whole generation off protein. For decades, the story was that eating more than the minimum amount of protein would damage your kidneys. That story came from a real observation, but the observation got misread. Doctors noticed that patients with existing kidney disease got worse faster on high-protein diets, and they generalized that to everyone. The problem is, back then, early-stage kidney disease was massively underdiagnosed. People walked around with damaged kidneys for years without knowing it, and when their labs got weird on a higher protein diet, protein got the blame. Modern lab panels catch kidney trouble much earlier now, so the confounding variable is way smaller. And the direct study that put the final nail in the myth showed that healthy adults training regularly on 1.6 grams per kilogram per day improved their metabolic profile without any measurable kidney harm. Cite the specific 2020's meta-analysis on high-protein diets and renal function in healthy adults.
The nuance still matters, though. If you already have kidney disease or a family history of it, this whole conversation changes, and you should be talking to your actual doctor before you double your protein. But if your kidneys are healthy, the fear was based on a misread of the data. Here's the part that got me genuinely excited when I first read into it. Higher protein is one of the few dietary changes that seems to help with body composition almost passively. Not because protein has some magic fat-burning property, but because of what it crowds off your plate.
When you commit to hitting your protein number first at every meal, something interesting happens. There's simply less real estate left for the ultra-processed junk that used to fill the gaps. The cookies, the chips, the sweet coffee drinks, they don't disappear because you have superhuman willpower. They disappear because you're already full from the chicken and the lentils. There's a study on adults with type 2 diabetes where a higher protein intake, roughly 1.5 grams per kilogram per day, preserved muscle strength and actually reduced fat mass over the trial period without the participants gaining overall weight. The mechanism is basically two things stacked together. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient, so meal by meal you feel full longer, and because you feel full, the hyperpalatable calories that used to sneak in between meals just don't get eaten. It's displacement, not restriction. And displacement is way easier to sustain than white-knuckle discipline.
That's the bonus effect nobody warned me about. I started eating more protein because of the muscle argument, and my snacking habit quietly died on its own within about 3 weeks. All right, so if 1.6 is the target, what's the ceiling? Because more is not always better. And this is where a lot of gym influencers quietly get it wrong.
The rough upper limit that keeps showing up in the literature is around 2.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight per day. Above that number, the returns basically disappear and the downsides start compounding. Push consistently past 2.5 and you start seeing real GI stress, bloating, weird digestion, that heavy brick in your stomach feeling that lingers for hours. Your liver also has to work harder to process all the nitrogen that comes off amino acids. And while a healthy liver handles it, why would you tax the thing on purpose for zero extra benefit? Now for the myth that refuses to die. You've probably heard someone say the body can only absorb 30 grams of protein per meal, so any extra is wasted or peed out. That claim has been repeated on every fitness podcast for the last 15 years, and it turns out the underlying study was pretty thin. The newer work suggests your body can happily use 80 to 100 grams in a single sitting. The digestion just takes longer, and the muscle-building signal stays elevated for hours instead of minutes. So if you can only eat 2 real meals a day because of your schedule, That's fine. You don't have to force yourself into 6 perfectly spaced feedings like a bodybuilder in 2005. The practical takeaway is simpler than the myth. Aim for your total daily number, spread it across the meals you actually eat, and stop stressing about the 30-gram rule that never really existed. Zoom out for a second, because the protein pivot didn't happen in a vacuum. For the last 20 years, the global diet ran on cheap fats and fast carbs, and the result was predictable. More than 1 billion people worldwide are now classified as obese, and metabolic disease became the default health problem in most developed countries. So the protein swing you're seeing on every supermarket shelf is not really a new fad. It's a correction of the previous overcorrection. We went too hard into low fat in the 90s, too hard into cheap carbs in the 2000s, and now the pendulum is swinging back toward the macronutrient that actually keeps humans functional as they age. There's also a real physiological effect I noticed on myself when I bumped my protein up. My sugar cravings dropped noticeably in the first 2 weeks. Not because protein has some magical anti-sugar effect, but because I was under-eating protein without realizing it, and the body compensates for a protein deficit partly by demanding fast calories. Fair warning though, that craving reduction effect only works when you're moving from a deficit to a normal intake. If you keep pushing protein higher and higher, the sugar cravings don't keep dropping. It's a fix for a deficiency, not an infinite dial.
Okay, now the good part. Where does this protein actually come from, and what does it cost you at the checkout counter? I want to start with plant sources because most people underrate them so badly, it's almost funny.
At the top of the plant list, you have soy in its various forms. Dry soybeans and tempeh land around 30 to 40 grams of protein per 100 grams of dry weight, which is genuinely competitive with meat. Tofu is lower because it's already hydrated, but it's still one of the highest density plant options you can buy. Pumpkin seeds are the sleeper pick, around 30 grams of protein per 100 grams, plus healthy fats and magnesium as free bonuses. I keep a jar on my counter and add a handful to salads and yogurt bowls without thinking about it. Lentils are my personal favorite, and this is the one I'll die on a hill for. Around 26 grams of protein per 100 grams dry. Cheap almost everywhere in the world, they cook in 20 minutes without soaking, and they give you fiber and iron for free. A pound of dry lentils costs less than a single protein bar and feeds me for 3 days. Chickpeas come in around 20 grams per 100 grams dry, and they're the most versatile bean on the list. Hummus, roasted snacks, curries, salads. Quinoa lands around 16 grams and has the bonus of being a complete protein on its own. Buckwheat and oats sit around 12 to 14 grams, which is not headline grabbing, but adds up quickly when you're already eating them for other reasons. And here's the part the old nutrition textbooks got wrong for decades. The idea that plant protein doesn't count because it's incomplete is basically a dead myth at this point. Yes, individual plant sources are lower in 1 or 2 amino acids compared to meat, but the second you eat a varied diet across the week, your body doesn't care. The old advice to combine rice and beans in the same meal for a complete protein was based on a misreading of the science, and the researcher who originally proposed it walked it back publicly years ago.
Now the animal side, which is roughly 1/3 of my daily protein, and probably should be roughly 1/3 of yours too. I'll explain the ratio in a minute, but first, the ranking by density.
Canned tuna is the cheap workhorse, around 30 grams of protein per 100 grams, shelf-stable, cheap, and one of the fastest ways to hit your number when you're tired and don't feel like cooking. Beef and other lean red meats sit around 26 grams per 100 grams, which is solid, but comes with a saturated fat tax I'll cover in a second. Now the underrated one that I want to spend a second on. Frozen mussels. They land around 20 to 24 grams of protein per 100 grams. They cost almost nothing at most supermarkets, and they cook from frozen in about 8 minutes. If you're not eating mussels because you think seafood is complicated, you're leaving one of the best cheap protein sources in the aisle. Shrimp and squid live in the same neighborhood, roughly 18 to 22 grams per 100 grams. Low fat, high mineral content. Eggs come in around 12 to 13 grams per 100 grams, which sounds low until you remember that a single egg is only about 50 grams, so you're getting roughly 6 grams of the highest quality protein per egg for pennies. And one useful bio-nerd note: fish protein tends to absorb the most efficiently of any source we've measured, ahead of both beef and dairy. So if you're going to spend money on animal protein, seafood is often the highest return per dollar and per calorie. Here's where I have to slow down and be honest, because animal protein comes with a real bill attached, and pretending it doesn't would be dishonest. The bill is saturated fat and cholesterol. And if you build a plate that's 90% animal protein day after day, your cardiovascular risk profile pays for it eventually. There's also the red meat and colon cancer story, which is one of those the truth is boring situations. The relative risk goes up meaningfully when red meat becomes a daily staple, and it goes up more when the diet is low in fiber. But that risk drops significantly when your plate has enough fiber to buffer the digestion. It's not the meat alone. It's the meat without the vegetables that does most of the damage. That's the whole reason the framework I actually run on my own plate is roughly 2/3 plant, 1/3 animal. 2 lentil and vegetable meals for every 1 meal that centers on fish or meat. It keeps the saturated fat in check, it gives me plenty of fiber, and it still hits my full daily protein number without effort.
You don't have to become vegetarian to be healthy, and you don't have to eat steak every night to be strong. The ratio is what matters. Okay, powders and bars. I've tested a lot of these over the last 2 years, and my take is more mixed than the marketing wants you to believe.
Problem number 1 is label fraud, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Independent lab tests keep finding that many popular protein bars contain a fraction of the protein they claim on the wrapper. Sometimes half, sometimes a third. The industry is loosely regulated, and the incentive to cheat is enormous because protein is the most expensive ingredient in the bar. Problem number 2 is what's actually in the honest ones. Even the bars and powders that deliver what they claim are still just protein. No fiber, no meaningful micronutrients, no phytochemicals, none of the stuff whole food gives you for free. So if you're replacing a real meal with a shake, you're not really getting a meal, you're getting 1 macronutrient in a cup. Problem number 3 is the one that matters most for anyone trying to lose fat. Powdered protein absorbs in roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Whole food protein takes 60 to 90 minutes to digest, which means the shake leaves your stomach 3 or 4 times faster than a real meal would, which means you're hungry again 3 or 4 times sooner. Great if you're bulking, terrible if you're trying to cut.
My honest verdict: whole food first, always. Powders and bars are a tool for a specific job. You're bulking, you're on the road, you can't cook. Outside of those cases, they're mostly expensive sugar with a good marketing budget.
Here's the operating rule I actually use, and it's the single most useful trick I picked up from all this reading. Plan your protein first at every meal, and let the rest of the plate build around it. The reason this works is almost embarrassingly simple. Carbs and fats will show up on your plate no matter what you do. Bread appears, olive oil appears, snacks appear. You do not need to plan for them. They arrive on their own. Protein is the only macronutrient that consistently gets forgotten, so it has to be the one you decide on first. Start every meal by answering the question, where is my protein coming from here? Then the vegetables, then whatever carb makes sense for your day. Do that for 2 weeks, and your daily number stops being a math problem. It becomes automatic.
Before we wrap, I have to zoom out one more time, because the risk with any dietary swing is that people take the message too far, and I'd rather you leave this video slightly undercorrected than dangerously overcorrected.
There are 3 real risks of going too hard on protein. The first is GI stress, once you push consistently above 2.5 grams per kilogram, which we already covered. The second is constipation, and this one sneaks up on people. When you double your protein, you have to scale your fiber intake alongside it. Fiber cannot stay at the level it was when you were eating half the protein, because now there's more work for your gut to process and less roughage moving it through. The third risk is the red meat and colon cancer story again. If your protein doubles, but it all comes from steaks and burgers with no vegetables inside, you're not healthier, you're just carrying a different kind of risk. Balance is the whole game, and absolutism is what turned every previous diet fad into a disaster.
Here's what I actually took away from 3 weeks buried in this literature. Modern nutrition is not about banned foods anymore, and it's not about maxing out one number until it breaks you. It's about balance, and it's about adapting your diet to the phase of life you're currently in. If you're in a cut, your protein target stays high and your calories drop around it. If you're bulking or training hard for endurance, your carbs come up to match. If you're in a stressful stretch of work where cooking is impossible, you find the 2 or 3 whole food shortcuts that keep your number without wrecking you. The diet adapts to the phase, not the other way around. If this cleared up even one of the myths you were carrying around, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I'm working on the next video right now. It's on fiber, which turns out to be the exact half of this conversation nobody talks about. And I'm running my own numbers on the same rebuild for it. I'm Arthur. I'm not a doctor. I just read the studies and test them on myself. Talk to your own doctor before you double anything in your diet, and I'll see you in the next one.